Hello folks, welcome to another episode of The Swift Half with Snowdon. With me, Christopher Snowdon. I've got my e-pipe this time folks. I've had a few complaints about my other e-cigarette bubbling, making a bit too much noise near my microphone and not looking very good. This, I think you'll agree, looks superb. It even glows at the end. And it's excellent for interviewing people. And who better to be my first guest while I'm interviewing with a pipe than Ed West. He is a prolific journalist, the author of a number of books, including his most recent one, which is not actually called this anymore, Small Men on the Wrong Side of History. It's since been renamed worldwide, I believe. Is that right?
I think so, yeah.
To Tory Boy,
Yeah.
which I don't like as much.
I prefer the original, but you know.
Is it selling more now? It's called Tory Boy?
No idea.
Publishers always think they know best, don't they?
Oh, I don't know. The less I say, the better on that subject.
But the book is subtitled, presumably still is it? The Decline, Fall and Unlikely Return of Conservatism.
I think it's been changed as well.
It's
But yeah,
changed as well.
we'll just assume it's... Yeah.
But that's what it's about. That's the important point. It is about the decline, fall, and unlikely return of conservatism. The unlikely return, does that refer to the 2019 election? Because that must have blindsided you a little bit, did it?
No, I think I just had to put a bit of fake hope in the end, because otherwise it'd be too depressing. Yeah, the election was really bad news for me, because obviously the book was written probably by the beginning of 2019, and then it came out at the beginning of 2020. Obviously, I didn't realise the massive plague as well. So I read this book about my pessimism, and it came out the week that the coronavirus shut down the entire economy, including every bookshop.
I remember not being able to go to your launch due.
Yeah, the launch due was postponed as well. I say postponed, I'm assuming it's cancelled now. But yeah, the election was also bad news, so I had kind of mixed feelings about that. On the one hand, we wouldn't have basically a communist government under Corbyn, but on the other hand, it would be bad for my book sales, because my book was basically about conservatism actually being in retreat. So, I mean, if it came out now, that'd be good. Now that Boris has kind of fluffed it and everyone hates him, and you know, Labour at 10 points ahead, now would have been an ideal time to bring it out.
But your part of your argument, at least, is that the Conservative Party aren't really Conservatives anyway. So it works either way.
Yeah, I know, there's a bit of a cop-out, isn't it? I mean, I do say I sound a bit like, it's a bit, you know, like offensive, it's a bit Peter Hitchens, isn't it?
Socialism never been tried.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Whatever you do. But I mean, I think this, I mean, on certain issues, I think it's reasonable enough to, you know, the Conservatives haven't exactly, 12 years in and out, you know, basically, a Tory MP, a Tory Prime Minister, they haven't exactly left their mark on the country and its institutions.
They've banned plastic straws.
Yep.
They've put a tax on carrier bags, on sugary drinks, brought in plain packaging for tobacco. I mean, plenty of policies to look back on.
If you went to a coma in 2010 and you woke up now and someone said, you know, you wouldn't exactly be able to guess who had been in charge for the last 12 years, judging by the state of the country. So my basic argument is, well, conservatism amongst people over a certain... I think we are basically the last generation, because people born from the late 70s onwards are basically repulsed by... I mean, we're on the cusp of the two generations, aren't we? Because I think you're about the same age as me.
Yeah.
Anyone younger is basically, you know, they just hates conservatism or Toryism or... You know,
and you don't think they're going to come around in later life? That's one of your main
No, I mean, there is... I mean, I haven't just made this up. There is like data showing that people tended to become more conservative as they get in their 30s, mainly because, you know, they have children, they get married, and blah, 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 move to the suburbs, and then they start more, you know, voting for centre-right parties. Although there wasn't huge, I mean, the Tories did used to do quite well with young people, so that's slightly exaggerated, but that's no longer happening. People aren't becoming more conservative as they get older. In their lifestyle, they are, sort of, but in their sort of politics, it just stays... It stays kind of so. It's actually a generational kind of. It's like the thing with church going that, you know, after a certain age, after a cut-off point, people just stop going to church. I mean, I think the two things are kind of. I mean, I do think conservatism is kind of basically depends on the church.
Yes.
I know that's not going to that's not a realistic plan for government, isn't it? Get everyone to go to church, but. Because people just, you know, have like alternative religions instead. You know.
And do you think there's a direct connection between religious belief and conservatism? Because I mean, there's not masses, but there's quite a bit of religion mentioned in the book. You seem to see that the decline of both as being in some way connected. I
think yes, because people need a sort of like a moral, like lodestar, like a kind of belief system that is, and conservatism is kind of a-religious. It's not irreligious. It's not really. I mean, conservatism in its original kind of ideological form was basically a response to religion and politics. It was like opposing it because the original religion and politics was the Puritans in the 17th century. So conservative thinkers wanted to articulate a belief in sort of traditions and hierarchy in which this kind of radical religion would not play a part. And if people don't have a sort of religion that's their guiding spirit, then they just find it in politics. I mean, you know, whatever you want to call it, the new progressivism or wokeism, whatever you want to call it, it's very religious in nature. I mean, some overtly religious, but
and
even like my
why
kids.
Why can't conservatism be like that? Why can't people treat conservatism with that same kind of passionate belief?
Well, because I think it's partly a sort of state of mind. I think conservatism is defined really by not being on the left. That's what. So if you're not a believer in this kind of set of beliefs, you are by definition on the right. So, you know, like you're sort of libertarian, and I'm sort of more.
Very conservative.
I'm just a conservative, not very conservative. It makes me sound like a baddie.
Well, you're one of the few people, really, in the media at least, who is out and proud about being a conservative. There's you and Tim Stanley.
I mean, and Hitchens.
And Hitchens,
he's
right?
older than us,
but I mean, you can literally reel off a few on a few fingers, can't you?
Yeah.
And I like that about you. You stand up and say, "I am a conservative. I'm not a libertarian. I'm not a liberal, whatever." And you do in the book actually give a very good definition of conservatism, I think. It's also a very funny book, by the way.
Thank you.
And you should absolutely read it. I'm going to read it again soon. It's brilliantly well written. But you do give, I think, probably the best, as someone who hasn't read Burke and people, you know, probably the best description of what conservatism means I've come across. I had Tim Stanley on the show a few months ago, and I was trying to get out of him what he thought conservatism means. It seemed to just come down to being reactionary, really, whereas you, I think, lay out the tenets of it. So it's not just being against things, not entirely, is it?
No, I mean, I suppose no one has really beaten Burke in his descriptions, you know, and Oakeshott as well. You know, it's a sort of belief in. I suppose it's it's anti-utopian, you know, primarily, and I think what we have now on the left is a sort of like a utopian. It's a sort of distant relation of communism, kind of communist vibes, but you know, without the really bad bits like the mass murder and the economic insanity. But it's you know, the left now is in that sort of utopian tradition of wanting, you know, to create a world that doesn't really take into account human nature. Right. You know, our sort of natural differences in men and women, for example, genetics, stuff like that. Conservatism is basically a sort of anti-utopian. I mean, sort of, you know, it comes down to religion, a sort of an anti-religion in politics kind of movement.
And what stops you being a libertarian? Because you write in the book that you kind of dabbled in libertarian as a...
I thought I was when I was younger, and I just really wanted the pubs to open later, and that was my main thing.
Isn't that reason enough?
I'd say, I mean, part of it is just lifestyle. I think once you have become parent, it's harder to become a libertarian. I mean, libertarian does assume that everyone has their own... has enough wisdom to make their own choices without some sort of like guiding. You don't have to be like completely authoritarian, but you do need some sort of, okay, this is the way to do it. This is what this should be your default sort of lifestyle choice.
It kind of assumes
and we, the elders, are sort of telling you.
I would say it's not that it assumes everybody has perfect knowledge or anything close to it. It just assumes that the government doesn't have more knowledge about your tastes and preferences than you do. I think that's the important distinction.
I think maybe conservatives, we just accept that men are basically wicked and evil, and that, you know, given the choice, we would probably all indulgent. I mean,
and therefore you need a government of experts to
I don't need government experts, but I think, for example, the pub thing. I mean, it would be nice if we. I mean, there need to be rules on alcohol, because otherwise it would be like the Scottish Cup final from 1980 every Saturday night in every city in England, wouldn't it? There would just be. You know, I mean, the smoking was a good one. I think at the time I was so angry about the smoking ban.
Yes.
And this has all basically forced me to give up smoking, because it just made it so impossible for me to smoke. And then I come back and thought, that's the great idea. I'm glad the nanny state told me to stop smoking, because, you know, my life is definitely better. Even if I lost some freedom, that's a sort of...
Yeah, you quite like it, don't you? You need the sort of firm hand of government.
You think it's a Catholic thing, don't you? You think it's basically...
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, you need the guys running around in black telling me what to do.
Well, you're full of guilt. And you need a sort of authority. Which
you make me sound like some sort of tortured sexual masochist or something.
I mean, your words, not mine. So what's wrong with Boris Johnson's government?
I mean, I think Boris Johnson is, firstly, he's a journalist. He's fundamentally unsuited towards governing. He wants to be liked. He's a lovable, comical figure. And I think, to rule, you need to be a bit immune to being hated. I mean, my thing about Boris is that he is more than sort of any other Prime Minister, basically born into the Liberal League. As much as people say he went to Eton, but if you look at his family background, he is very much a sort of London Liberal.
Yeah,
he went to Eton because his parents are very ambitious. But if it's, his sister-in-law was a garden journalist, his sister is a Remain, his dad was an environmentalist. He lived in Islington. You saw after the Brexit vote when there were people outside his house screaming at him. It wasn't just that the public hated him, which politicians put up with, but those are his people. These are the London Liberals, which is fine. Which, as Mayor of London, that's what you want in the Conservative. You're not going to get like a hang and flog 'em, old-style Tory, backbencher running. But running the country, he just wants to be sort of liked by the people he really needs to be taking on. I know he's obviously being distracted by the corona and Brexit, but.
So do you think if Boris were to go, which is...
Bear in mind, he might have gone by the time...
Yeah, right, I was going to say, by the time this comes out, who knows? You think if they get somebody a bit sounder and then they could do the job? Or do you think there's some kind of basic institutional problem now with the Conservative Party, which means that it will never be Conservative?
Well, I mean, I don't mind the Conservative Party not being Conservative. I know it sounds a bit perverse, but I mean, the Conservative Party has always been a sort of alliance of Conservatives and Liberals, isn't it? So, I mean, it was there to stop. I mean, Boris Johnson, whatever else he's done, his one contribution to British life is he stopped Jeremy Corbyn being elected. I mean, that alone, you should get, a place in Poets' Corner, a funeral at St. Paul's, a couple of statues.
You don't think anyone else could have done that?
I didn't think, I would have, if I was a member still, I would have voted for Jeremy Hunt, but I don't think he might not have beaten him.
Really?
I don't know. I mean, there's probably election experts tell me I'm wrong, but Boris was very popular at the time, wasn't he? He has sort of a natural... I mean, he's got a natural affinity with the public, and he's naturally electable, but the people who are electable aren't necessarily the best. I mean, the idea would have been him as the kind of public man, and then someone, number two, just running things, basically. But it doesn't seem to work like that. And there seems to be a lot of court drama going on, which is just not good.
Yes, there just seems
It's
to be
just
a lot of that.
it's just too chaotic. I don't know.
So who would you have in instead?
I mean, not many
What
names jump out, do they? I mean,
Well, Rishi, obviously, Jeremy Hunt.
I mean, Michael Gove is my choice, but I mean, I think he's the most effective person running. I know I said
but
he's
he's
also
another
a journalist
London
as well.
Liberal, isn't he? At least
No,
as much
I think Michael Gove
Boris.
I think Michael Gove is a bit more sound, a bit more based, and
Really?
yeah, I think he keeps it down a little bit, but I think he's
Quite keen
definitely
on
more.
banning things as well. With Gove.
A lot of things need to be banned, though, Chris. It's just I know I am the wrong place to say that. I would say Gove, but I don't think he's really electable, is he? He's not really. I think the public just they want sort of clownish figure, and that's what they're going to get. But my problem with Boris Johnson is not really. I don't really have any ideological problem with him because
He hasn't got an ideology.
he doesn't have any ideology. I don't think that's necessarily. I just don't think he's very competent, and it's a bit depressing that that's what we get, isn't it? I mean, there are more effective. I mean, it's not as bad as America, is it? I mean, they've got someone who's literally senile who beat Trump. I mean, and then you look at their choices, they're awful. Clinton v. Trump, then Trump v. Biden, who can't string a sentence together. But
Think Trump will be back?
well, I mean, we do miss him, don't we?
It would be fun.
It's just everything's empty. I mean, it's like a TV series when they get rid of. It's like when they get rid of Kevin Spacey and House of Cards or something. It's just. It's just not the same.
Compromise and say let him back on Twitter. That would be a reasonable halfway house to me. He doesn't need to be president again, but at least let him back on Twitter.
I think he served his time, isn't he? I mean, they let the Ayatollah of Iran on Twitter. I mean, surely he's more beyond the pale, surely, than Trump.
Do you think? Quite a big question, this one. Do you think Western civilization is basically finished?
Well, I mean, ultimately, yes, isn't it?
Within what kind of time frame?
No, I don't
Within
know.
our lifetimes?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I'm definitely not in our lifetimes. It depends when we die, doesn't it, really?
Let's assume another 40 years.
No, I think it's obviously in decline relative to other parts of the world, and I mean there are obviously signs of decadence, and you can, on a basic level, its birth rate is unsustainable. So I mean, if it continues on that birth rate, then it is basically doomed, isn't it?
Yes, I just saw.
Just me so many.
Did you see the figures today?
Yes,
just hit the point at which, for the first time ever, more 30-year-old women don't have children than do.
Right. So yeah, I mean that's enormous. I mean, I think that's kind of hit home more with COVID, didn't it? Because when you're waiting for the vaccines, when you're waiting to get through the old people, they said, oh, this time it's the 80-somethings, the 70-somethings, the 50, and I was waiting saying, bloody hell, like, hurry, there's so many old people in Britain. There are just so many of them. And then they said, all right, okay, now it's, and then like the next day, oh, it's 30-somethings, oh, the next day it's 20, oh, and so the 12 young people left in Britain all got those done. And I think at the time, I went to, staying a bit in Dorset last year. Was it last year? Yeah, last year. Dorset, Somerset, places. Yeah. It's just so many old people all across
There were even
England.
more before COVID.
It's slightly, changes ratio, but I think if civilization is aging. But I mean, I'm not the worst. China is way ahead in that level now.
In what respect?
When their birth rate's completely collapsed. Yeah, their birth rate's completely collapsed. I mean, it's basically the problem sort of across the globe.
Of course, a lot of people say the solution here is more immigration.
Well, they're wrong, aren't they?
They're
deviants.
Do expand.
Well, the whole immigration thing. Well, so that's a sort of part of conservatism, I think, which is a core part of it, which is that conservatism is parochial. It means supporting things like national identity, and it's obviously the most stigmatised and most dangerous, the third wheel of conservatism, because of the old events 80 years ago, which make it unpalatable. But of course, if I want the people of my country to sort of exist and not be, I hate to use the word replacement because that again, that's kind of being stigmatised, but immigration, that's what it basically means. I mean, that's not really a solution to falling birth rates, just to sort of get other people into the country. Then at some point, it's no longer recognisable as a country, is it?
So what do we need to get the birth rate up then?
I don't know. I mean, no one wants sort of like, an ugly middle-aged man giving
You've
them
done your
love
bit,
advice.
haven't you?
I have children. I've mated, yes.
Yep, quite fertile.
To be fair, there is one glaring issue which comes into the book, which is the housing costs. It's a massive problem. There's definitely a correlation between housing costs and fertility, and between both those things and how right-wing people are. Yeah. So one of the reasons people aren't getting more conservative is because it's too expensive to have kids, and it's too expensive to have property. So obviously, if you're 30-something and you can't afford a home, and then you can't afford a family, there's not really much reason to become a conservative, is there? I mean, I joined the party, I think, soon after having kids. And then I left in disgust. In fact, I only really joined so I could leave in disgust. But it was a sort of process where I thought, now I'm probably like a middle-aged fart. I can do that.
And then you chopped up your membership card and tweeted it.
Yeah,
in response to something you can't even remember now.
Yeah, exactly. Something I actually probably agree with now. So I mean, the housing cost is, and this year again, housing has gone up again. And I mean, that is.
Well, do we know?
I think that's probably killing.
Do we know? I mean, I don't know what the evidence is. Do we know for sure that is the reason people are having fewer children, or is it just deciding that it's really a pain to have 3 or 4 children and they'd rather have one, which is basically what I did.
I think there's definitely a fair amount of evidence that housing costs put down fertility. A lot of it's just it's just modernity, isn't it? I mean, my grandmother was one of 7, her mother was one of 10, and you wouldn't want to do that these days unless you had to. I mean, they wouldn't.
Which you do if you're Catholic, of course.
Well, I mean, even Catholics have sub-replacement fertility. Even churchgoers, they're having less. I mean, they're obviously not exactly obeying the rules. Or I mean, I don't want to peer into people's private lives, but that's happening everywhere. It's just the cost of living. But I think housing is an area where the government could do something concrete, and then Michael Gove wants to do something about that. But the street votes policy, which is I think he's in favour of, which would allow people to make the houses in their streets high density. That's one clever idea, but until they sort that out, then I think we're in trouble.
Don't you think, playing devil's advocate here for a second, don't you think even if the government managed to build 500,000 homes a year, wouldn't a vast number of them get snapped up by, not necessarily buy-to-let people, but just as investments, because we've got high inflation, property prices keep going up, people need somewhere to live, there's a shortage. Why would we assume that these are necessarily just going to go to normal home buyers?
I think on the basic level, I think it comes down to demand and supply. I mean, I think if you built more houses, they would become cheaper. Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm sure some of them.
Well, rents would definitely fall. I'm not saying this wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
I'm basically massively in favour of building new houses, but it seems at least possible that.
I mean, I'm sure
in uncertain times, the best probably better than gold. The best investment is anything in British property because the price
Aren't
is not
some
going to
movies-
go down. And then you rent it out, and yeah, okay, rents go
Yeah.
down, but that's still not giving people the possession of a house, which you're saying makes people have more children and vote Tory.
Yeah, I think overall, I'm sure that, I mean, isn't it, I read that McDonald's actually make more money from property than burgers now. And there was
Really?
it was a Twitter thread, it might not be true. And also with, there was a big watch company, which apparently is all just property. I mean, that's how you make money, yeah.
Well, there we go.
Yeah, I'm sure that happened, but I think our housing situation is like desperate now, isn't it? So, whereas,
Even after COVID again.
and it's gone up. I mean, it's funny because at my daughter's like leaving day under COVID, and all the kids, 100 kids, and like 25 of them were asked to speak. What are you going to do in 10 years' time when you grow up? And every single one except one said, "I want to have my own flat." And I just imagined Christian Nemitz telling them, "You will never have your own home because of the NIMBYs." So that's like a real ambition, and it was quite the norm. To live in your own flat or to live in a flat with friends in a sort of reasonable central area of London, and it's always been the case. And that's really impossible for a lot of people, isn't it? So that is quite depressing.
It is. Everything's depressing.
Exactly.
I mean, Western civilization's coming to an end. You can't be happy about it, can you?
No.
You're on Substack now.
Yep.
So you've been at various outlets over the years. As a very prolific and very interesting, thought-provoking journalist. And you're now on Substack, which I don't. I mean, I'm not a. Well, I blog a lot.
Yeah.
I'm not on Patreon. I'm not on.
No.
So we're on Patreon. I'll tell you about that later on, folks. But I've never got involved with that. I've never really subscribed to anybody's Substack. Is this the way forward? Do you think for journalists in a declining media market?
Yeah, it's well, I mean, it pays quite well. So which is unusual in journalism.
Only if you get the subscribers.
I think, yeah, I mean, someone described it as, another Substacker described it as OnlyFans for ugly people, which is...
yeah, right, I guess.
you might not have heard of OnlyFans. So,
I've heard of it,
yeah.
so again, I'm not subscribed.
So I think, like in that model, there's a sort of, it's a long tail that few people make a lot of money, but obviously most people get shekels.
So what's
for
the
sending
key?
pictures.
What's the key to making money from it?
I don't know yet. I'm so yes, the audience sort of builds up, and then once you've got the audience, I mean, I guess you sort of charge, and some people pay, and then it's a kind of a new model. It seems to be working a lot with a lot of people. A lot of Substackers have done pretty well.
Because I mean, it's obviously very appealing, and journalism is not what it was as a career, to put it mildly. Well, the only thing that strikes me about it is there's some people who you're aware of as journalists, and then they go in basically behind this paywall, and you forget all about them, really. I mean, Laurie Penny is one. I mean, it's not somebody I particularly want to
I'm surprised
follow,
you
right? But I remember Laurie Penny being a
Yeah.
thing, 10 years ago, and now she's behind a Patreon wall or one of these things.
I'm sure
and she's probably doing great.
Yeah.
She's probably making a lot of money. But in terms of like being a public figure, if you like, it does seem like you're almost taking the cash over the influence. Do you know what I mean?
That's the best of both worlds, isn't it? Surely you get more money, plus all the people who hate you probably won't see you anyway. So the model before is you get paid pittance, and then
Everyone hates
everyone sees you. And most of your hate, you can just get hate clicks, and everyone's shouting you, calling you all various things, And so, oh great, I'm a journalist, and you come home after, just despised by the entire world.
Do you get a lot of hate on Twitter?
I
You
set
just
my
get devotion on Twitter, don't you, maybe?
I don't know. I set my thing so I can only see what people say if they follow me. I did
Oh,
that.
have you?
I was quite tweeted by a really, really stupid and Labour MP and another famous lawyer and a radio presenter. I think it was some very innocuous article. I think it was that one where I said that children should be allowed to work.
Child labour, pro-child labour.
Pro-child labour, yeah. If you phrase it like that, I suppose it sounds a bit like, which I believe. I mean, that wasn't. Yeah, I said there shouldn't be allowed in certain industries like mines and stuff. But otherwise, they should be in the office and like age 12 or 13.
A bit wet, that.
I mean, yeah, I know.
Chimneys, all right.
Well, it depends. I think there have to be some sort of regulations. But yeah, and so it was. I think I tweeted once something that dared to question whether Marcus Rashford might be writing all his tweets, and I got quite a lot. I mean, I'm sure he writes most of them, and he thinks deeply about them. But I got loads. I mean, I got more hate for that. I got like 500 abusive messages. That got more hate than Marcus Rashford got for missing a penalty, which cost us the European Championship. There's no.
Possibly. But they can only hate you by quote tweeting you. They can't respond directly. Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, I can't even see them. So they quote tweet me, but I wouldn't even know. I can only see what people are saying about me if they follow me. So if it doesn't,
so all these people who are hating on you, they're your followers.
No, they're not.
How would you know they were?
Because I changed it since then. After I got loads of views, I realised you could actually change the settings, and so you're blissfully unaware. So I just think, well, that doesn't matter, does it? Just screaming into the wind.
Well, so you really are. You are retreating from the world, aren't you? Really.
I'm just retreating from people who disagree with me. There's nothing wrong with that, right?
But they have nothing
hiding
behind your paywall and blocking anybody who doesn't follow you from replying. Interesting.
I mean, I know this is hostage fortune, but I think a lot of the Twitter is a sewer of abuse is kind of overplayed, isn't it? I think people make a bit of a drama of it. Most people who become like, who get loads of abuse sort of dish it out as well. It's kind of sort of like, crime amongst gangs, isn't it? Most of the people who get shot are sort of they're not innocent bystanders, are they?
They only do it to each other.
Yeah, it's Corbynites versus anti-Corbynites, but it's a sort of.
I do think it is a sewer of abuse. I just don't mind. I mean, it's just sticks and stones comes to mind.
Yeah.
I just don't know why these people complain about it so much. Just block them.
Yeah.
Block people. You'll never hear from them again.
How many people do you block?
I'm nearly up to 5,000 now.
Really?
2 years ago, I wasn't
like
even up to 1,000. Oh, really? No, I just block immediately.
I mean, I agree with your article when you said that was a very good article about why you should block rather.
Yeah, don't
it was
mute.
you, right?
Yeah. Block,
right.
Don't mute.
Which actually changed my view, but I think, there's only like 10 or 11. And there's like dangerously mental people, I think, who actually, I really, might come and kill me. But the rest of them.
Has anyone who's ever, it's a serious question, has anybody who's ever made a death threat on Twitter followed through it, ever?
No. And this is again, when you see people, they made death threats, like, death threats in the old days. I mean, someone actually go and write you a letter. That's a real death.
That's
exactly the old-fashioned kidnapper's way. That was a proper death threat. Phoning someone up. I mean, my mum, got them in the sort of the 70s and 80s. Mm-hmm. Not a huge number, but 1 or 2. And that's the same on Twitter. It doesn't mean from an anonymous account. That's not really a death threat, is it?
I agree.
Is that a controversial thing to say?
Well, probably, yeah. We'll probably get a lot of hate now from.
Fine. This behind the paywall, isn't it, right?
Who follow you.
Yeah, exactly. I won't see, so it doesn't matter.
They might stick it in the YouTube comments. So if you want to send me some hate, Al or Ed, pop it in the YouTube comments. We'll be fascinated to see.
Yeah, or at Ed West, but if you don't follow me, I won't see, so it doesn't really make any difference.
There you go. Or you can get his email address somewhere, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Or even his physical address. I'm looking up at the clock because I think we're up to 30 minutes. It is a swift half. We call it a swift half because it's only half an hour. We don't want to take up too much of your time. Hope you've enjoyed it. I certainly have. Thanks very much for coming, Ed.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks very much for watching you guys on YouTube. I mentioned the Patreon before, and with good reason, because you can not subscribe. I don't know what you do. Maybe you do subscribe. You can give us money on it anyway. Yeah. And if you give us money on Patreon, it goes specifically to digital output just like this, and it's not cheap to produce, I can assure you, and you can probably tell that from the quality of these interviews. So you can go to patreon.com/IEA London, or if you want to do it the old-fashioned way and just give us an anonymous donation. We will not reveal your name, of course. We're a top-rated think tank when it comes to donor confidentiality. It's iea.org.uk/donate. Or just stick us some cash in an envelope. Just address it to Chris Snowdon. Don't need to get involved in anything else. See you in a couple of weeks' time. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Owen. Goodbye.
Cheers, Chris.
Well, if you enjoyed that conversation, why not watch one of these other videos? And while you're here, remember to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss out on a single IEA broadcast.